It's my privilege this morning to introduce Dr. Dan Arvizu, Director and Chief Executive of the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Dr. Arvizu has led NREL since 2005. Dr. Arvizu challenges NREL and its partners to look beyond innovation, to the commercialization of renewable energy technologies at a more accelerated pace than we have ever seen before. NREL's mission is of national and global significance. NREL has been a key contributing partner to the World Renewable Energy Forum Conference, and throughout the week we will benefit from the world-class expertise and professionalism of our colleagues who work with and for the laboratory. Since its founding in 1977, NREL has been a valuable national asset, leading research, development, and commercialization of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, policies, and market development. After more than 3 decades of professional engagement with the clean energy field, Dr. Arvizu has become one of the world's leading experts on renewable energy and sustainable energy. He frequently engages with national leaders in Congress, the administration, academia, nonprofit organizations, and industry. As NREL's director, he has established and implemented a new institutional strategy to position the lab for higher impact and contributions to the national energy challenges. In the past 5 years, he has overseen an increase of more than 50% in the lab's operating budget, a doubling in the technical staff, and attracted over $400 million for new infrastructure. Dr. Arvizu was recently elected as the chair of the National Science Board. This is the organization which is responsible for oversight of the $7 billion National Science Foundation. Please join me in a warm welcome for one of the true leaders of the renewable energy revolution, Dr. Dan Arvizu.
Good morning. Thanks, David, for that overly generous introduction. It's great to be with you this morning, and it is my privilege to be yet another one of the people who live here in Colorado to get the opportunity to welcome you to our beautiful state of Colorado. And for those of you that will get an opportunity to visit the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, welcome you to that as well. Before I start, I would like to say a couple of congratulatory acknowledgments. First, ASES President Susan Green, thank you, Susan, wherever you are, for your wonderful leadership, and certainly David for your leadership of that wonderful organization. And also my good friend and colleague, Ali Saig, the Director General of the World Renewable Energy Network, who I've known for a number of years and continues to press on the vision of renewable energy for all. Do appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning. I thought what I would do this morning is to try and get a little bit of context. You're going to hear a number of technical presentations. You're going to hear details about some of the technologies. I could easily name my talk the promise and the opportunities and the challenges of renewable energy. So I thought I would take a fairly global view and give you just a little bit of a swing through what's the current state of play for renewable energy technology, help set the context for much of the discussion that you will have the rest of the week. So without further ado, let me go ahead and begin, I think, with this presentation, which offers some insights that many of you know well, and others, if you haven't seen these, I think may certainly get something from them as well. Certainly in the global environment, the value and the virtues of renewable energy efficiency, are well understood. Sometimes it's not apparent in this country that that's the case. But one thing that I can say, and I start every talk with this particular slide, and that is that our energy future really demands that we solve these 3 challenges and we solve them simultaneously. It's not a trade-off between security, environment, and economy. It is, in fact, a congruent solution that offers solutions in all 3 of these. And for those of us that have been in the renewable energy and energy efficiency field for a lot of years, these all can be solved simultaneously, and perhaps is one of the best options that we have going forward. So that said, in the U.S., the the renewable energy mix is actually rather modest. The top graph, I don't expect you to read the details, but just to hear the conclusions. The top graph is production, the bottom graph is consumption. The difference between those is the amount of imported oil that we have. Over on the right-hand side, what you see is the percent of renewable energy, and it's a very modest percent. So non-hydro renewables is still in the modest range of 7 to 8%. We can do much better, and I'll go back to that as we go forward. I recently was a participant, as many of you perhaps in the audience were, of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, special report on renewable energy and its mitigation potential for climate change. And I'll take a couple of graphs from that report. One of the things we purposed to do in this very, very comprehensive 3-year study was to survey the relevant literature that was out in the press and to understand what is both the status of the technology and where can it ultimately go. And this particular graph is kind of where how the renewable energy mix essentially comports with the overall energy supply of primary energy globally. And what you see is it's something on the order of 12.5 or 12.9% for all energy in terms of renewable energy. And what you find is that about 10% of that 12%, or the majority of the 12%, is actually comes from what we call traditional biomass. And that's biomass, even though it's renewable, it's not sustainable. This is where we're thinning forests and foraging for firewood in developing nations, perhaps, developing economies, and also burning animal dung for cooking and those kinds of things. Very unsustainable in the sense that it is what people have to use to survive. But we're trying to make that part smaller. So if you take out that piece, we're still in the 2% globally of how much energy there is essentially being supplied by renewable energy. The second thing that I would say about that is this is another graph out of that report, and the vertical shaded area is the cost, or the price, if you will, of conventional energy. Energy, what we pay globally. On the top part, you have electricity, and then you have heat, and then you have fuels. And each of the rows are different kinds of renewable energy. And so there's a range. And in some cases, renewable energy is beginning to get competitive with conventional fuels. And in many cases, it's not quite there yet. But this is kind of a snapshot of where we are. So suffice it to say, there's plenty of opportunity to continue to improve the technology, but it's getting closer and closer to where we need to be. I show this graphic because this graphic illustrates that, and it's again in the report, it illustrates that the potential of renewable energy is not in question. If you look to the far right-hand graphic, that blue bar is primary energy that the literature would suggest we can extract from solar, strictly from solar. And it is quite a few times, many multiples of what the global consumption is. The global consumption is something on the order of 492 exajoules, and several orders of magnitude more solar energy available than the amount of energy that the planet consumes in today's environment. Many other technologies, electricity, heat, are all also provided in that report. So the question isn't so much about how much resource there is, because there tends to be a lot of resource. Now, one of the things that we were asked to do in the report is to answer the question, how much energy that we can extract from renewable energy globally by the year 2050, at what cost? And unfortunately, one of the things we could not do in the report was to provide any certainty around what we actually will achieve in the year 2050. Notwithstanding the fact that we know the technology is moving fairly rapidly, and notwithstanding the fact that we know there's plenty of technical potential, what we don't know is what will be the conditions by which we ultimately will get to our energy state in 2050. So this particular chart, which again I don't expect you to read in any kind of detail, but if I draw your attention to the right-hand side, this is 164 different scenarios that we actually modeled using, again, most of what we had peer-reviewed literature to understand what would the outcome be in terms of percent of renewable energy that the globe could actually absorb or to satisfy our energy needs according to a number of parameters. And what we determined was that under the 164 different scenarios that we ran, you could pretty much get any answer that you wanted. Okay, this scatter diagram says, and if you go to the very top dot on the very left-hand side of that graphic, what you will find is that that's 77%. So 77% of the global energy supply or demand could be satisfied by renewable energy under that scenario. There's also another data point way to the bottom on the right-hand side, that's 5%. And so somewhere between 5% and 77% is what we can actually achieve with renewable energy, and assuming a number of things have to happen in order to make that happen. I thought that was particularly instructive. It wasn't necessarily satisfying for those who wanted us to give them an answer, but it did give us some pause to say, you know, what answer do you want? But for the will to do this, can do whichever one of those we want. Now let me just give you a little bit more context. This is a set of projections that was essentially put forth by ExxonMobil, and it is a projection of how they see the world going forward if we keep on the same track that we are today. The left-hand set of graphs is North America, the middle graph is Europe, and the far right-hand graph is all of the developing nations, including China, India, Indonesia, and a few of the other economies that are moving very, very rapidly. That orange piece in the middle is coal. So if things continue on the trajectory that we have had in the past, I call that a little bit of trying to drive forward by looking through the rearview mirror. If you have just extrapolate forward what we've done in the past, this is what it'll look like. And I think there's plenty of reason to suggest that unless we change the trajectory, this is what we're going to get. So this should give us pause, because in fact what it tells us is no matter what we do in North America or in Europe, what happens in the developing economies really matters in terms of the goals that we've set aside for ourselves. Now, we've heard a lot about natural gas, and in this country, there's a lot of debate about the value that natural gas brings. If we go back to that very first graphic about if we care about carbon, and I think the only place where that's actually being debated is in the US, but assuming that you care about carbon, one of the things that you will find is that even with natural gas, if we don't start phasing out even a scale-up in natural gas by the year 2040, 2050, we will not achieve any of the carbon loading goals that we have set for ourselves through the Framework Convention on Climate Change and a variety of other mechanisms. So that green section in the middle of this graph called low carbon generation has to come from something. One could argue it could be nuclear. One could argue it could be a carbon capture and storage of carbon from fossil fuels. One could argue that it's also could be supplied by energy efficiency and renewable energy. We've already accommodated some of that in this particular study, which MIT did recently, to talk about what is the role that natural gas plays. But suffice it to say, natural gas, where it might be a nice bridge technology, is not the answer to what we're actually looking for in terms of a transition and a transformation that needs to occur. And that essentially is where I want to start this particular part of the discussion, because in fact, we have a set of attributes in our energy mix today. It's the attributes that are on the left side of this graphic. And we need to get to a set of attributes that are on the right-hand side of this graphic. And we really shouldn't care which technology gets us there. If they can satisfy all of those needs, then we should be happy. And in fact, we should call that success. I will offer that renewable energy and energy efficiency has a greater opportunity to participate in that future than some of the other alternative technologies. So all of these to say is that this should be our consensus position that we want to get from the left to the right, and we need to do that as quickly as possible. So in the US, certainly we have a number of structural issues that I will call barriers to moving quickly from one state to another state. On this graphic, I've got 4 key points to make. On the upper left-hand point, that is the amount of R&D investment in innovation as a percent of sector sales of various sectors of our economy. On the far left-hand side is pharmaceuticals. One knows we put a lot of time and energy in terms of innovation, in terms of R&D, if you will. For pharmaceuticals, that's up around 20% of sector sales. On the far right-hand side, of course, is energy. And it is a small fraction of 1% of sector sales that we actually spent in innovation. Now, it's not that we don't have any innovation. We do. In fact, we have innovation in upstream exploration, and this recent developments for natural gas would have to do with fracking and horizontal drilling were a direct result of a lot of investment in R&D that allowed us to gain those new techniques. But suffice it to say, we underinvest. That's a key point. The graphic on the right-hand side is sector utilization. So whether you're talking about transport or you're talking about electricity, one of the issues that we deal with a lot is the assets and their ability to contribute to the business case. So in this case, it's called asset utilization. What it really is, if in the U.S. we have $2.5 trillion of generating assets for our electricity grid. The demand for electricity in this country, if you just averaged it out, is about 1/2 of what that generating asset is. The utilization of those assets is 47%. It's 47%, meaning that 53% of our asset investment is sitting idle all the time. Now, there's not many businesses that actually run in a productive way, profitable way, with an asset utilization of 47%. And it is, in fact, because we have a very highly regulated environment around energy, and that is an issue that we need to attack. That's an issue that definitely needs help. On the left-hand side is the long, essentially, cycle time for these investments. Nuclear plants that went in literally 30 years ago in the U.S. are now getting re-evaluated for a life extension to go to 60 years. There's actually work at the Department of Energy that's looking at how can we extend that 60 years to 90 years. If you put in a coal-fired power plant or a fossil fuel plant, many times the life cycle of that plant is 40 to 50 years. The amount of time that it takes first both to put these technologies into the ground and then ultimately to operate them over their lifetime is measured in the metric of centuries, or half a century. So in this case, decisions that we make today have a huge impact on what happens mid-century and beyond. And if, as the graphs would indicate, we want to move away from carbon emissions into our environment, then we need to be thinking about the life cycle and the long life cycle times of these various generation assets. The bottom graph on the right says that in most regions of the world, public policy matters. Public policy is what drives these transitions. It allows us to move that transition time into the marketplace more quickly. And so that, again, is part of what should frame our own debate. I was recently, 2 weeks ago, at the Clean Energy Ministerial in London, and some of these graphs were showed at that particular forum with all the energy ministers of many of the economies around the world. In this case, what you see here, and this is grid-connected renewable energy non-hydro, and you can see that we're up around 300 gigawatts. So that's more like 500 gigawatts if you include the non-grid connected. But you can begin to see where in each country you see quite a bit of activity. Certainly the EU is about 135 gigawatts. The US is at 56 gigawatts. China is 50 gigawatts and climbing. That's, again, grid connected. They've got another 20 or 30 that are not grid connected. But as you see here, there's a considerable amount of generation assets. And what we're finding is that in many economies, and I think this has already been referred to this morning, but it already is a fairly significant portion of the electricity generating assets. So you can see Denmark is already at 34%. They actually have 25%. I was just there a week ago. 25% from wind, and expect to go to 50% by 2020. And ultimately, I think many of these economies are looking at how can they get to 100%. Something that we didn't talk about much in the past, but certainly are talking about it now. This is the energy mix of these various countries, and you can see the light blue there. The biggest section of most of these is hydro, or we call it conventional thermal, hydrocarbon laden types of generation. Total conventional thermal is what that's called on this graphic. And you can see there's, in various countries, you're beginning to see a fairly significant mix. And it is, in fact, something really important, because the next phase for renewable energy is how can you have high penetration renewables onto a grid or onto your transport sector to accommodate that for essentially an environment that was not built for distributed generation. In the U.S., it's sometimes lost on people, but we've had a number of things happening, not at the federal level so much, but at the state level. This is what we call the grassroots stuff, and many states have actually incorporated policies like the one here in Colorado, where we essentially purpose to have 30% of our energy, electricity generation from renewable energy sources. In this case, by the year 2022, I believe is what it says there. So we're actually very, very aggressive in certain regions of the country, and this has been going on for the better part of 5 or 6 years, in some cases longer. And what that has resulted in 2001. The graphic on the left shows you how much renewable energy share of net generation there was. The darker colors are greater than 15%. And the graphic on the right is what's happening in 2011. What you see is quite a transformation from where we were even 10 years ago in this country. So for those that don't follow kind of the domestic scene very, very much, what you're seeing is there is a lot of progress. Maybe not so much as Senator Bennett suggested, not so much progress in terms of policy in Washington, but there is, in fact, quite a bit of progress in regions of our country. And this is important because I think the next big phase is that we're going to try to figure out how to incorporate high-penetration renewables onto the grid. And that was what we talked about at the Clean Energy Ministerial in London a couple of weeks ago. These are some of the barriers, and these are the things that we will be addressing with a very concerted focus. Legal markets and institutional barriers, coordination, a number of jurisdictions that actually do in fact affect how quickly we can move renewables onto the grid and in our transport sector. Public support. The public is confused. They get all these sound bites from various points of view, and we need to have a much more cohesive story going forward. And ultimately, it's both a systems level issue about solutions, and it is a regional issue because different regions provide different sets of dynamics, and in fact we need to have the conversation that's much more sophisticated. It's not one size fits all. It's many, many different things, and we need to be solution oriented as we move forward. Now, one of the things that I get the opportunity to do today is to look ahead at the end of this conference on the Thursday session. There's going to be a discussion on a panel about a new report that will be released this week. It's called essentially our Renewable Electricity Futures Study, but essentially this particular report is an analysis. It's an evaluation. It's not a projection. It's not a prediction. What it is, it's an analysis that says what are the both challenges, implications, and opportunities that you can have in this country domestically if you do a very sophisticated analysis of having renewable energy on the grid from 30% all the way to 90% renewables. Now, I know in previous times we've not ever talked about high penetration renewables of those quantities in this country. This is not foreign to our colleagues in Europe. They talk about 100% all the time. We're looking at what would it take in this country? What are the implications of that? Can it be done? What would the various factors need to be? Again, not a prediction or a projection, but in fact, an evaluation of what can be, and ultimately, what are the implications of that? So I invite you to go get the detailed version of this on Thursday at that panel discussion. This is one graphic out of that report that's coming out. It's a fairly extensive report, many stakeholders with a whole bunch of additional variables and evaluations. But what it suggests, if you look at this graph in any detail, is that in every region of this country, even those that don't traditionally think about themselves as having many resources, there are resources, and there's a lot that can be done on a distributed generation basis in those particular regions. So it's an exciting report for us because we're taking a real close and very comprehensive look at what those can provide to us. So what this really tells us is we have great opportunity, and the opportunity moving forward has essentially dimensions to it. It's about technology. Certainly, that's something that we have been focused on at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory as part of the Department of Energy's programs. Also, has to do with markets and the market evolution and the market dynamics and the market rules, and ultimately the policies that drive those market rules and how that all kind of comes together. So in addition to essentially looking at this thing, technology by technology, it really does behoove us to take a look at this across a broader spectrum. I've mentioned it's really about the basic technology and the applied technology, but also moving that technology into the marketplace, integrating that technology at a scale that's commensurate with the needs and demands, and ultimately the how part is going to be done in partnership with the private sector. The private sector is ultimately the markets that will drive. The government has a particular role to help shape those markets and set the rules, but ultimately it's going to be the several trillions of dollars in this country and tens of trillions of dollars globally that will be spent in our energy infrastructure over the next few decades that will drive what ultimate outcome we get. And again, going back to the IPCC study, we can drive the answer that we want depending on making the business case and ultimately talking about where those technologies need to play in the overall mix. I'll just say a word about technologies because I know I'm going to leave Chuck a little bit of time to give you some additional information about the conference. So the first thing is that, technologies, there's multiple pathways, lots of pathways. We've got lots of opportunities, I think, in many different types. These are promising PV technologies, but also there's concentrating solar power technologies. Different parts of the world, you get different solutions. There is tremendous momentum in the wind area. I just toured the R&D facilities of Siemens in Denmark. Very, very impressive in terms of how quickly the technology is moving. Next generation, on top of next generation, they're already working on their 6-megawatt offshore wind turbine machines that ultimately, I think, will be those that will find their way into the marketplace very, 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 very soon. New technologies, new approaches, lots of attention to aeroelasticity of blade design, to different kinds of drives for turbines, as well as offshore platforms and all the things that go with that. Tremendous opportunity offshore. We're just scratching the surface for what that needs to look like. But suffice it to say, and you'll hear a lot more about that in the conference regarding the status of wind technologies. Additionally, biofuels, lots of innovation in biofuels. In the last 5 years, there's been a tremendous effort. It started off as looking at cellulosic ethanol. We've moved beyond that. We're at the point now where we're trying to, I like to call it, getting hydrocarbons from carbohydrates. So we're really looking at biomass materials, cellulosic materials in particular, breaking down the cell structure, recombining those into fuels that look a lot like our infrastructure-compatible fuels today, and we just drop those into the existing infrastructure without creating a whole new infrastructure. Lots of exciting work going on, lots of partnerships with the Department of Defense and a number of others who are looking at what the next generation technology will look like, and again, a lot of exciting revolutionary things going on there. Certainly no small attention to amount in our transport sector. So in the transport sector, you got the fuels part, and you have essentially the mobility part or the actual transport part. And in this case, certainly for light-duty vehicles, and at least in this country, there's been a big effort put on making our vehicles much more efficient. So the President announced a CAFE standard improvement, that's the corporate average fuel efficiency, that will improve almost by a factor of 2 our efficiency of our fleet. And that will create, obviously, a lot of additional opportunity for biofuels and a variety of other fuel switching, which includes electric vehicles, plug-ins, lithium-ion batteries, a variety of things that are part of the national program going forward. Buildings innovation is another one. We're particularly bullish on this. I frequently say it makes no sense to shove green electrons into a very inefficient system. I think as a starter, we start with efficiency, make things much more efficient, and then a distributed generation will actually make a lot more sense and be a lot more cost effective. On the upper left-hand part of this graphic is a particular building that I'm particularly excited about because it's my new home. We just moved into the research support facility at NREL. We believe this is one of the most efficient buildings in the world. We put 2.5 megawatts of solar PV on its roof and the associated parking garage, and this building is designed to be net zero energy. I actually think it will create and generate more energy than it actually consumes on an annual basis. It it incorporates much of what we already know about energy efficiency, and an important part of what we need to do in the future to actually achieve one of those futures that are on the upper hand of that graph that I showed at the very beginning is to make our infrastructure a lot more efficient, both the new infrastructure and the as-built infrastructure. And so a lot of attention needs to be paid here in terms of buildings, and we're very, very pleased at the National Renewable Energy Lab to hopefully take a leadership position on that. For those of you that will get a chance to visit the lab, you'll get to see that world-class building. I do need to say a word about integration, because everywhere I go, and I've given lots of talks, both globally and domestically in the last few months, and you hear two things. One is natural gas, and the other is integration, systems integration. It's the how do you move technology onto the marketplace more quickly, and how do we accommodate this renewable energy resource, which is very distributed and also has variability to it, into a grid system in particular that was not designed to do that. And so one of the new competencies that we've developed at NREL, and one that we're particularly pleased about, is our new Energy Systems Integration Facility, and it speaks specifically to this problem. I was in China about a month ago. I found it noteworthy that 35% of the wind generation in northern China is actually being curtailed, meaning that they essentially throw it away, because it does not have the ability to connect to the grid and serve a load. They're working with this particular issue. This also is something that Europe has been dealing with for some time, especially in those countries that I showed earlier where you have high penetration of renewable energy. We are now getting to that stage in the U.S. We need new competencies that help us do that. We're building a new facility which is under construction. We'll move in the late part of this year, called the Energy Systems Integration Facility, and it's $135 million of investment that the U.S. government has made on systems integration, and it'll have all of the various pieces that go along with this, and we're very, very excited about what that provides. It'll also allow us to do hardware in a loop at the megawatt scale. It's got a high-performance computing, so you can do simulated environments and bring in data from all different kinds of projects around the country, around the world, to actually put together with simulation software of utility grids in particular regions and locations to allow there to be risk reduction of scale-up of renewables by the utility segment. So we're very excited by that. We've got a number of partners, again, EPRI, the Electric Producers Research Institute, and a number of others who have been really noteworthy participants in making all that happen. So let me end this introductory talk by just saying, really innovation is going to get us to the next stage. There's already great momentum, and we're moving very quickly. In my opinion, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to backtrack on where we are. Certainly there will be challenges, certainly as a result of the financial challenges that the entire globe is facing, but we need to invest. We need to invest in innovation. That is the pipeline for the future. We need to decide which outcome we really want, and I am convinced that we can do a lot better in terms of the mix of renewable energy and energy efficiency in our ultimate mix, if we just purpose to do that, and if we have a vision of the future that's not the same as the vision of the past. And so we want to change our thought process about how much we want and drive for that, because in fact I think it's up to us to figure out how we get there. Ultimately, this is private sector funded. I think the government can help. The government can let the markets move, can let new technology find its way and compete without subsidies and do all the things that are necessary. It is access to capital. It is risk reduction of private sector investment. That's what we should be about. I think we're well on our way. Ultimately, energy is a commodity, and it's on the global scale. And if we aren't working in partnership with our colleagues in every part of the globe, then I think we will under-leverage the amount of effort that's already going on. And I think together as a community, we've got great opportunity. I continue to be very bullish about what the future holds. I'm impressed by the younger generation who actually get this a lot better than some of the people in my generation. But I'm encouraged because ultimately we have the opportunity to shape our future, and it's a good future. It's a future that we can be very, very good. Recognize that it's a good return on the investment that we're making, but for our national will and our international collaborations, will only our own ingenuity will be limited by the amount of effort we put into it. So I thank you again for coming to this conference, and I wish you well for the rest of the conference. I'm very excited by what it portends. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for all that you do.